All right, sorry. Just trying to make sure it works so I don't record the whole thing and then you can't hear me. All right, so today we're going to look at kind of continuing what we had talked about last time, and we're going to look at types of selection and the evolution of populations. Um, so natural selection is one type of selection. So selection meaning how the organisms that survive to pass on their traits are determined, right? And so there are other types that are important for evolution. None are quite as pivotal as natural selection, but we want to talk about those. And we want to talk about the evolution of population, so how groups of organisms of the same species change and grow over time. And as a little picture here, I have the population of Earth and its projection to grow over until 2050. So, first we'll just look at types of natural selection since this goes a lot with where we left off last time. One type is called directional. And in directional selection, there's a shift in the frequency of a trait in a particular direction. So this is something that's really common in changing environments. So selection tends to favor a genotype or a phenotype that's at the extreme, at one extreme of the spectrum of phenotypes. For example, in horse racing, the breeders try to breed the fastest horses. So if the trait of speed is what's being selected for, it's selected in a directional way towards the fastest end. All right. So you want to pick horses that can run fast and you breed them together to get even faster horses. So over time, if we look at the distribution of phenotypes of all of the racehorses, they'll be shifted towards the faster end. And this is what we call directional selection. What is favored is at one extreme of the phenotypic spectrum. We have what's called stabilizing selection, and this is what happens when the extreme phenotypes are the least favorable. Okay, and this is the most common in really stable environments, right? So the middle, the in-between phenotype is what is selected for. So either extreme is equally detrimental. So think about this in, let's make something up. In an environment where you have a group of lizards and they're preyed upon by hawks, all right, and they live in a very, wooded environment, and they can range, their skin color can range anything from white, to black to kind of grayish in the middle. Okay. Now, uh, the very white and the very black uh, lizards are going to stand out against their kind of green background, and they will be selected against. They'll be more easily spotted. And the intermediate, the middle phenotype, kind of the gray, will blend in the best. So they will survive and be able to pass on their DNA. That's an example of stabilizing selection. Stabilizing selection. So stabilizing selection is very common in unchanging environments, stable environments, um, where those extreme phenotypes don't have an advantage. And lastly, there's disruptive selection, where the intermediate phenotype we're talking about in stabilizing selection is now bad. It's the easiest, it's the least favorable, the least fit. So in this situation, either extreme is equally desirable. And so we tend to see a pattern like this, where over time the mean or the average phenotype is selected against. So here is an example of directional, disruptive, and stabilizing selection. We can look at some different ones. So for example, on the right for stabilizing selection, birth weight. Birth weight for humans is something that's been influenced by stabilizing selection. So too small of a baby won't be healthy and strong enough to survive, or will have a decreased chance of surviving. A overly large, heavy baby will have a hard time passing through the birth canal and being born without complications. And so a middleweight baby will be the most desirable. You can kind of look at some of the examples. The middle examples with snails, that's a lot like the example with lizards that I used previously. Another type of selection is called artificial selection. Artificial selection. So in artificial selection, instead of whatever is the most fit for a given environment and is able to compete the best, instead of those being selected for and being more able to survive and pass on their genes, artificial selection is based on um, what humans choose. We selectively choose the traits that are desirable to us, and then breed organisms together to produce more pronounced traits. So if you look on the left in this picture, all of those vegetables have a common ancestor, which is on the right, Brassica oleracea. And these different modern vegetables were all selectively bred for by taking that ancestral species, Brassica oleracea, and choosing which traits we wanted to for favor. So if we favored the roots, we got kohlrabi. If we favored the leaves, we got kale. If we favored the flowerets, we got broccoli. Axial buds, we got Brussels sprouts. Okay, so that's really a big example of artificial selection. And also dogs. Dogs are perfect examples of artificial selection since they all are the same species. All dogs are the same species, not the same breed. They're all the same species that descended from wolves. And so early humans had bred wolves to increase their friendliness to humans and their ability to be domesticated. And then their lineages were selectively bred by different populations for traits that were useful or desirable, whether it was hunting or working or herding. And that's how we get the wide range of dogs that we have today. So, just the key thing, difference between natural and artificial selection. Artificial selection, nature provides the variation, all right? Nature provides the variation, so the differences in traits, and human selects the variations that we find useful, like in domesticated animals and crops. In natural selection, the environment is the selective force. So nature provides the variation, but the environment, the situation, the context the organisms find themselves in are the selective force. And only those organisms that are well adapted to survive in the wild and those states are the ones that survive. And lastly, just wanted to mention sexual selection. So this is the perpetuation of specific traits based on their desirability for mating. So, for example, in a peacock, this male peacock has really big feathers, is really bright blue. This is a male peacock. That's very desirable to female peacocks. And so those traits over time have become more flamboyant and they've been passed on, even though that bright coloration is a detriment for it surviving. So sexual selection can act in a counteractive way to natural selection. All right, or if you look at the large throat pouch on a lizard or the really ornate plumage on these birds, um, select traits that are selected for because they are viewed as aiding an organism in acquiring a mate is examples of sexual selection, and they could actually work uh, counter to an organism's survival. Because what you need to understand about natural selection is that the fittest organism won't always be the one that is the best suited to the environment or is the strongest or the fastest. It is the one that can reproduce the most. So as long as an organism, it's all about reproduction. As long as an organism can uh, have progeny and can spread its genes into the next generation, it is successful. That is how we define success or fitness: is ability to have, you know, viable offspring to pass your genes on. Now, in a lot of situations, it helps if you are really fast or really strong or really intelligent. But reproduction is honestly, at the end of the day, what it's all about. So we'll stop here after the types of selection, and then look for the next video about population genetics.